Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the No Mustard podcast. This podcast is brought to you from the purchase of my magazines and art by viewers like you. You can learn more about my work or subscribe to the Fast Food Legend newsletter by visiting fastfoodlegend.com. I'd like to introduce my guest this week, Stephen Page, a singer, songwriter, and musician best known as a founding member of Barenaked Ladies. Since going solo, he's continued to evolve his work through projects like his live from home concerts, the collaborative group Trans-Canada Highwaymen, which is a supergroup including members of Sloan, Odds, and The Pursuit of Happiness, and in his annual summer camp experience that brings fans together in a much more personal, immersive way. You've heard his songs in countless movies, sporting events, TV shows, commercials, and occasionally when your parents purchased a lottery ticket. He's one of my favorite songwriters, and if you're not familiar with his backstory, he's about to be one of yours as well. Welcome, Stephen. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Okay, so I'm going to show you a picture and treat it like a Rorschach test, if you like, but at least in this first picture, I'd really like to get to the story behind it as much as we can, okay?
Yeah.
This is the Harveys at the corner of Jarvis and Gerrard in downtown Toronto. Now, I've read that Ed did an interview years ago where he said that after a Peter Gabriel concert, this was the first place that you both kind of connected and started talking about music. However, your version of the story that I've heard in interviews is different, that you were both counselors at a summer camp and he came up to you singing your songs. Shed a little light on this origin story, please.
Both are true. That picture, the interesting thing about that picture is it is a Harvey's at Jarvis and Gerrard. That is, it's not the Harvey's where we met.
That was the next question. Okay.
This Harvey's here is known to people in Toronto as Hooker Harvey's because it's where the sex workers would walk mostly on Jarvis Street. I don't know if it's still like that. I don't think so, but in that part of the city, but and they would often get warm and hang out in the Harvey's. But the Harvey's that we locked eyes in was the one across the street from Maple Leaf Gardens. It's not there anymore. It was right on Carlton Street. And we went to see, I think this would have been 1986 or
Peter
87.
Peter Gabriel, the tour where he introduced stage diving to the general public.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think he did that. I remember seeing him doing that on the Security tour very gently. And then this was on the So tour. This was the kind of where he brought African musicians with him and so on. It was amazing, an amazing show. But I always thought of Ed Robertson, because he was a grade below me in high school and in elementary school as well, as being kind of a rock guy, like prog rock and hard rock. And I was very much a kind of a new wave kid, and folk rock and those things as well. So to see him at a concert that I had gone to was a big shock. I just thought he was like in a completely different world. And there was all of a sudden there was this intersection. It was one of those things. He used to joke that I said, wow, Ed likes Peter Gabriel. And I thought that was a big deal. And he looked at me and went, wow, Steve likes hamburgers. And that was the end of that. But we knew each other from school. And I remember like a year later, I watched his band. He had a cover band, and they played at this Battle of the Bands at our high school. And I was one of the judges. And again, I expected them to be playing a bunch of stuff that I was not into, hard rock kind of stuff. And they did some of that, but then they also did a Peter Gabriel song. They did, I think it was Stay Up Late by a Talking Heads song anyway, something off Little Creatures. And I was like, holy, this guy likes my music as well. And then later that year when we were working together at this music camp, that's when he walked up to me playing one of my songs. I'd been writing and recording songs with my best friend. Whenever our parents would go out of town for the weekend, we would rent a 4-track cassette recorder, get a bucket of KFC, and laugh and make up songs and, experience the joy of overdubbing. And then we'd pass these tapes around the school. And I guess Ed was given a copy of this tape by somebody, and he learned the songs, which is, of course, deeply flattering. But the most magical thing about that really was just that it was so effortless for the two of us to sing in harmony. And that was really the beginning of the band. Before that, it was the first time we kind of acknowledged each other as fellow humans. But when we actually sang together, there was this magic.
Can you still remember what your go-to Harvey's order would have been at the time?
There was a Harvey's near my high school, and we would go there on lunch break because the McDonald's was a little bit too far to get there and back and lunch, but the Harvey's was right there. And the kids who didn't have money, they were very nice at that Harvey's. You could just order pickles, and they would give you, wrapped in the wax paper, like they would wrap a hamburger, a bunch of slices of pickle, which was wonderful. So sometimes it was just that if you didn't have money, but otherwise I would say it would be probably a cheeseburger, and I would have, they top it for you there. I would not have relish, but I would have pickles, because the sweet relish, no, but the dill pickle, yes. Mustard, and onions, probably. I didn't have a girlfriend and had no promise of having a girlfriend, so onions were fine. Tomatoes, probably too. And then I would have an order of frings, which is half fries, half onion rings.
Awesome. I tried to find the closest Harvey's to where the Maple Leaf Gardens had been, and then I had seen that this one had clearly been around for quite some time, and that's why I guessed that maybe that was going to be.
It's a great guess, because it's a legendary Harvey's. I think it's probably, at least in the Toronto area, the most iconic Harvey's is this one right here.
Now, I'm assuming you have never actually been to this, Mr. Sub, but you'll tell me if I'm wrong. It is 3 streets north of the corner of Jane and St. Clair, which we know is a fictional location for the song. Jane is picked out by Stephen off of a map. Tell me all about it.
Well, Jane and St. Clair, yes. I was writing with my friend Stephen Duffy, who was my, still is my mentor, my hero, my favorite songwriter. And this is a guy that I had started writing fan letters to when I was 15. When I was 15, I went to the UK on a choir tour. Was a member of the Scarborough School's youth choir, and we went over there and traveled. We sang in like Westminster Abbey, and we sang in St. Martin's in the Fields, and we sang at York Minster Cathedral, and so on, like all these incredible places. And I listened to his first album over and over again on that trip, and so I'd written him a fan letter, and he wrote me back. I have no idea why, but he did, long before the era of the age of email or AOL even. And when I started making records, he came to a gig at one point. We had met a couple times by this point, but he said, "Do you want to write some songs together?" And so he came to my house in Toronto, and we wrote. He was supposed to be there for 2 weeks and stayed for 6, and we wrote the bulk of what was to become Maybe You Should Drive, the second Barenaked Ladies record. And one day he was looking at a map of Toronto and saw the intersection of Jane and St. Clair, and he said, "Oh, it sounds like the most beautiful intersection in the world." And
had you actually been to that intersection before?
It was the kind of thing you would drive, in the backseat of your parents' car, you would drive past it. But it was rarely even driven past, because there would be a more major thoroughfare 1 street over. You could be going down Black Creek Road and just bypass it. But I like the fact that you've shown a Mr. Sub, because even though it's a modern Mr. Sub sign, the income tax, the accounting above it, like it looks that kind of strip mall that could be in Scarborough, where I grew up. So that, you could have said, "Oh, that was a Mr. Sub at Painted Post and Markham in Scarborough," and I would have believed you. But there you go. I was going to say founded in Yorkville in 1969, and I see now on your sign it says 68, so I was off by a year. I always, in my mind, imagined it was like hippies in York, because Yorkville was the hippie hangout in Toronto, much before my time. But I always imagined hippies walking around eating submarine sandwiches.
Which special would you have gone for? The grilled chicken, the smoked meat, the Louisiana pepper chicken, the meatball, the tuna, the turkey, or the spicy breaded chicken?
Well, as a young person, there were not nearly that many flavors. This is pre the Subway revolution. I remember when Subway first, we used to go to Subway all the time. Ed and I would go after a show because they were open late. It was novel. You could ask for the toppings individually. Like you could, the man would divvy up like 3 slices of green pepper on your BMT or whatever. And I think, Mr. Sub has followed in those footsteps. So now, if this was now, I'd probably have the tuna sub because I think I don't know. It's kind of so uncool. And also just kind of, it's just soft and I love it.
What were the Mr. Sub options growing up, though?
Oh, well, all I can think of is, so sometimes my dad would bring home, like, think about this. Think about 1976 in the suburbs of Toronto. There are 5 options for takeout food. I wouldn't even, like, this is before there were drive-throughs at McDonald's that I remember. Like, McDonald's is a place you'd go to sit down in. Like, if my dad was picking something up on a Friday night after work or whatever, it would be fish and chips, pizza, Chinese food, which is very rare in our house, KFC, also very rare in our house, and sometimes Mr. Sub. And so he would just bring submarine sandwiches, and they were just assorted. So it was like, the equivalent now of like an Italian sub, but, so there'd be salami, there might be ham, but it would have everything. It would have lettuce, tomato, onions, and lots of that oil and vinegar salad dressing. And that was that. And that was what you just, give you half of a sub, and that was supper. And so I still feel very nostalgic about an assorted sub. But and I like the fact that if you look at Instagram now, if your Instagram feed is anything like mine, it's a lot of people taking sandwiches and showing you the like they cut them in half and then they show you the inside of the sandwich. And I just love looking at that. And especially if it's like some kind of that you have to go to this Italian place. But they all look the same pretty well. But I could look at that all day.
There's a weird thing that Americans do that I'm still trying to understand that I've discovered through my work, which is they love to show photographs of half-eaten food. So not just cutting it in half, but they'll take a messy bite and show you this disgusting glob of stuff. And I'm actually on my 3rd volume. I make little magazines that, my fans read. And I'm on my 3rd volume of pictures of half-eaten food that was uploaded to Google Maps, where I write very serious reviews of these kind of pictures. And I still can't quite understand why people do it. Let's go to a more dense part of town, Queen Street, right next to the Eaton Center. There's a Tim's. This Tim's has been there forever. The last time I was there, I remember looking across the street at the back of the theater where Paul Stanley was playing the Phantom of the Opera in the 90s. And it is shockingly still there. Have you ever been to this Tim's? What do you remember about it?
So this is on Queen Street?
So on Queen Street, like the back, you're like right next to the entrance for Eaton Center.
I know where you're talking about. I'm not sure if I've ever been inside of that Tim's before. My sense of Tim's for most of my in my childhood, they were few and far between. They weren't half as common as they are now. But they were just a donut shop. And we usually got our donuts, if there were donuts. Again, my dad would come home with a bag of day-old donuts. That was what we had at our house. And they would usually come from country-style donuts, which was the major competitor. There was also Mr. Donut was the other one. But country-style was the one we usually got our stuff from. But Tim's really took over in the late 80s, probably. And it's been bought and sold a few different times since then. The big change for Tim's was when they stopped baking or frying their donuts in-house. They were frozen, and they would show up frozen, and they'd be thawed. That changed everything as far as the donut industry went. It was just kind of, and it was also, the other big change was, I guess, in the very early 2000s or the end of the 90s when you could no longer smoke in a donut shop, and all of a sudden you could actually taste the donuts, because I would just always thought they tasted like ashtrays. But when we were originally touring, like Ed and I were playing with a band called Corky and the Juice Pigs, a comedy group. We were 19-year-old kids and very excited to be going across Canada in a van. And Tim Hortons would be one of the common places, especially at the side of the road. You'd stop there and you get coffees or giant coffees and giant teas. One thing that Tim Hortons does that I think is great is their steeped tea. So you can get, hot tea with a bag and hot water, but they also always have a pre-steeped jug of this stuff of tea. So it's like, it makes me feel like an English worker on a tea break, that there's some lady with the big tureen there, or the big pot. It's not exactly quite that big. It's just like a coffee pot, but I think that's the best thing they have in the whole place.
Upstate near, I don't know if it's near you, but the upstate New York, they have Stewart shops that also do the steep tea jug. And the only other place I've seen them for whatever reason is at the Beverly Hills Hotel.
I've never had the privilege of going to Beverly Hills Hotel, but I have gone to a Stewart's. We don't have them here in central New York. We are, but probably I would say we're 45 minutes from the closest Stewart's, but I do understand the love the people have for it too.
Let me ask you about.
I just wanted to tell you a little bit about Tim's. Another thing about
please,
Tim.
please.
So they have become the de facto takeout food restaurant in Canada.
Wow.
In urban Canada, for instance, this one here is full of commuters and whatever else, but every small town has one. So they became the hub for people to congregate. I like to believe they are the greatest contributor to climate change in Canada beyond the actual oil and gas drilling industry, because of the long lines of idling vehicles in their drive-through. But they have become the place where people go and eat. And it used to just be you could have a bagel or like toast and soup, and you could have soup or chili. But now they have flatbread pizzas. They have all kinds of sandwiches. They have decent breakfast sandwiches, a fairly decent selection of that stuff. But in my travels, I have grown to resent them deeply, because quite often it is the only thing you can eat in your travels across Canada, depending on time of day and stuff like that. And it's not my favorite thing to eat, and I'd like to have a little more choice, but they really are the place. They are the congregation place for Canadians, especially in small communities.
Let me ask you about traveling a little bit.
Yeah.
Obviously, when you go on your Q&As, people are always asking you for travel advice and all this kind of stuff. When Brian Wilson came out, I know, of course, everybody's asked you a million times about your experiences hearing him sing in concert and everybody's looking at you, or when he came to visit you guys in the studio and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
But one thing I have never heard anybody ask you, I am also huge Beach Boy fan, grew up with all that stuff, and I also have had a couple of my own unique, weird Brian Wilson experiences, not nearly like yours. When you were touring and traveling, or like when you were recording in LA or any of that stuff, did you ever take a little road trip to visit the Beach Boy house location in Hawthorne? Did you ever go to that deli that he used to eat at every day? Like, did you go to any of the Brian Wilson locations when you had the chance?
I didn't. I mean, it's one of those things. I think at the time I was so focused on doing my own thing. And I think we had a funny thing in our ascendancy, I think, particularly was that we had this disdain for nostalgia. As much as I loved Brian Wilson, and I loved, my biggest thing is the Beatles, I never went on a tour of Liverpool. I played Liverpool a bunch until I went there on a solo tour, like a tour with the Stephen Page Trio in 2017 or 18, might be in 2018, that we got on the Magical Mystery Tour bus and went around. Something in our band really resented the baby boomers constantly telling us that their time was the good time for music, for culture, for politics, for activism, for whatever it was. So I remember stupid stuff that now I look back and go, oh, you idiot. I remember being um, at the Juno Awards, in which is like the Canadian Music Awards, it might have been our first Juno Awards in 1993, where we were already kind of punks in the sense that they had asked us to sing our hit song Enid, and they wanted to do it in the setting of like a 50s diner with, like the Breakfast in America lady holding a tray and um, gum chewing and whatever. I don't know. The Kids from Fame and whatever. And we were like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do our song Box Set, which is about the music industry. And it wasn't a single or anything. We're going to do this, and we're going to be dressed up as clowns in full clown costumes and full makeup, because so much of the Canadian music industry hated us and thought we were a novelty act and were embarrassed by us. And we were like, oh, you want clowns, huh? You want novelty? We'll give you some novelty. And it was the most like menacing punk rock thing we could ever do. I love the performance. But at the end of the show, I think they were, it was either that year or the next year, they were doing a celebration of the band. And Rick Danko and Garth Hudson and Levon Helm were all there, and like guys from Blue Rodeo and Colin Linden and these great musicians were all going to play with them. They're going to do Life as a Carnival for the finale. And they wanted us to come and sing. And we're like, I'm not going to go sing with a bunch of old boomers. Wow. Like we said, no thanks. Like, what an idiot. Why would you do that? But I think it was that kind of like focus on the future and focus on the present, and we were really at that point excited by indie bands that were out there and hip hop. And we wanted it to, if we could bring any of the spotlight that was on us and help shine it on emerging acts, that was our goal. And I think that kind of like self-belief is what you have to have in order to make it. But I look back, like we did a Burt Bacharach tribute show with Burt Bacharach, hosted by Burt Bacharach. And we're kind of like, why are we doing this? Like we put 100% of our effort into it, but I think we had to be convinced that this was the right thing to do, because it wasn't our choice at the time.
That is such a shock to me, because you're such a serious songwriter. Like I'm a songwriter, not anywhere nearly as successful as you are, but I take it very seriously. I study, and I know, the inside and out of all the good stuff, and so I'm just so shocked that you would, especially somebody like Burt Bacharach, wouldn't be like, yes.
I think we absolutely did. Like we did say yes. But I think there was always that twinge in the back of like, what, we were so focused on the now, even though it was all music that I loved. I think, for Ed, it was different. There was like he didn't grow up with a love of the Beatles, for example. I mean, he grew up listening with his parents. He listened to country music. That's what they played around the house. Yeah. And then he got into prog and stuff, but it was kind of, they were more contemporary acts. And I think, for him especially, it was like, I think he really wanted us to look out for ourselves first and look forward. And that was I wonder, how much I would have been kind of mired in the past if we hadn't have been pushing each other in that way. I think it was absolutely the right thing for us, but it is hilarious now to look back and go, why were we so negative about old people? I think in a certain way, because old people were so cynical about us.
Yeah. I remember getting in a lot of trouble in the music industry forum as a teenager, because I went to see Duran Duran for the first time when I was maybe 18. They played Roseland Ballroom, it's 96 or something. And I complained, why are there so many old people here? Yeah. And everybody gave me a lot of shit for that. So I kind of get the mentality contextually at that time, right? That's what was happening in the culture. So I get it. And
now I'm constantly telling people, if somebody's coming to your city, and even if they're not at the peak of their form anymore, it's time to go see everybody you've ever liked. Like, just go see them, yeah. and don't hold them up. I think that we have this tendency to hold people up to you must live up to your memories. And some of us, I like to think, exceed your memories, but we may not always. And so if it's somebody who's, who doesn't have the mobility, it doesn't have the voice, but it's still them, and you're going to celebrate your memories together with them and everybody else in the room. I think it's so valuable.
Yeah, that's one of the things that kind of held me back in life, but at the same time, I don't regret, is the moment I had a car and enough money from a job, I went to see James Brown, Little Richard, Aretha Franklin, Chuck Berry, Donovan, Leslie Gore, like anybody you could think of, because I knew just somehow I'm not going to get to do this later.
We were lucky in Toronto. We had a venue called the Ontario Place Forum, which BNL played in 91 and 92, and then they tore it down. They built kind of the generic amphitheater that's there. But it used to be on publicly owned land, and quite often the shows were free. And I went to see I went to see James Brown, Johnny Cash, Little Richard, Taj Mahal, the Manhattan Transfer, Bruce Coburn. Like, it was what a range. And the Men Without Hats. Like, it was this amazing range of people. The Monkees reunion in 87 or whatever that was. Just amazing shows that I'm so glad I got to see. Like, this year, I have tickets to see Dion, who is my favorite singer in the world. And I've never seen him perform before. And I just think, like, why? I have to go see this. So I'm going to get in the car and drive.
Yeah, I've seen him. Let me ask you, this is coffee time. Don't even tell me about it. I don't care. What I really want to ask you about, I wrote a book last year. It's coming out in the fall. It's about how to direct a pop concert. Nobody's ever written a book about that before. And I got that education, same as you, from going to see all those people and many more, including yourself. I saw Barenaked Ladies a zillion times in a zillion different places at the peak of all that. Now, you are absolutely an innovator in terms of these live from home concerts. Nobody else has done as many as you've done. Nobody else keeps doing them. A lot of people forced their way into doing them during the pandemic, or you have people like Glenn Phillips, who, when it was all brand new years ago, did a bunch of them and then kind of gave up. But you've really, I can't think of anybody else who's doing it as much as you are doing it. Now, the other thing is you're also doing it with the experience of having played clubs, arenas, sheds, benefit, musical review shows, all kinds of different things. And now you're coming to do this format. Over the course of the last few years, one, how have you figured out what works and what does not work? Two, have you figured out, like, what's the perfect time? Because I looked at some of the time counts, and some days you're doing like 3 hours almost with the breaks. Have you figured out at what point you start losing people, or are there tricks to bring them back when you do that don't work in a live setting? And three, probably the most important question I have about it is, day later, 2 days later, whatever, do you ever go back and watch the video of the audience in more detail to watch them watch you, to see how they're reacting? Because in live performance, you simply cannot do that. Have you done that, or have you thought about it, or you don't do it at all? Tell me all that stuff, please.
Well, it's amazing with those live streams. Like you were talking about Glenn Phillips. I did a tour with him years ago. I want to say 12 years ago or something like that, like where we were doing Sgt. Pepper's with the
Is that with Cheap
Art
Trick?
of Time Ensemble.
Okay.
No, it was with the Art of Time Ensemble, this Toronto classical jazz pop amalgam, the incredible organization run by this classical pianist, Andrew Barashko. And we did a tour of performing arts centers in the U.S., and Glenn and I were both on it. And he was, at that point, I think, doing his weekly live streams, and was trying to convince me to do one with him. And the whole thing kind of freaked me out. I didn't want to do it, and I didn't do it. And then when the pandemic started in 2020, I was so, against it, I guess. I thought, the one thing that we as musicians still get paid for, which is our live performances, now that's free too, and you're competing with Garth Brooks and his kitchen or whatever else. And mega stars give, a little peek into their lives, and they play their big hit, and all the hearts go crazy on the Facebook Live. But I just feel like singing into the void made me feel gross. Like, I didn't want to do it. And then I saw a friend of mine, Dan Mangan, a singer-songwriter from Vancouver. He had a company called Side Door, where they would basically they were like matchmakers for people who wanted to play house concerts. You could say, I want to host a house concert. I'm in Calgary, Alberta. And then they'd put that up on their site, and you could work it out with these people and come into their house and play a concert and get paid for it. So he had a ticketing system already designed. And then, of course, there were no more house concerts in 2020. So he started doing these live shows over Zoom and selling tickets for them, $8 or whatever. And so I thought, well, I'll tune in. And I loved it because I could not only watch him, but I could watch all the other people watching him, because they have the generosity to turn their cameras on. And so they could see me, and they might be excited that I'm watching the show. They're talking in the chat with each other, and they're talking to him. And I thought, I could probably try this. And so I tried it. And at that point, you couldn't have more than 1,000 people in a Zoom meeting. So it like sold out. People were like, how can you sell out something on the internet? The internet is infinite. Well, this wasn't at the time. So I just did it the next week, and it kept going. And it was, for me, initially totally terrifying. Like, I had played solo a bunch, especially since I left Barenaked Ladies, and I had developed a bit of a solo act. But at this point, I realized I had to make the set list different every show. It's completely different from a live concert, because a live concert, you can have a template for a set list and just switch songs out according to your mood, to what, maybe you might have fans who have seen you before. I'm going to switch stuff out with a few new songs and a few old ones and the surprises, but the general shape of the set list is the same. So then I started giving myself these challenges, like, okay, I'm going to do every album in order, solo album and B&L album, or I'm going to do every song. I'm going to do, let's say I'll do 26 songs in alphabetical order. And in that case, there were some songs, some letters I didn't have songs for, X and Z and so on. So I wrote songs to match those letters, which ended up on my last record. Like, it just gave me this kind of creative boost. But I think the thing about performing online, particularly on Zoom, and no, I haven't gone back to watch them. I try to avoid watching anything that I do after I do it. Like, often, even when I'm making records, I like the process of recording, but the process of editing and fixing and whatever else, I hate it, because I hate hearing the flaws, and in the moment, you forgive the flaws because it's expression. And sometimes it's just a mistake, and sometimes it's just, it's slightly out of tune, it's slightly out of time, and it doesn't matter in the moment. But when you're preserving it for forever, it starts to grate. I'm not a big fan of watching myself. But in the moment, I feel like over that first year of COVID, I developed a couple of things. One thing is a much better sense of musical time. Like, when I came back to doing shows with the Stephen Page Trio, those guys really they remarked on the difference of my kind of much more rock solid timing. And I'd been playing as a professional for 30 odd years at this point, but supporting myself that way really changed the way I play. But it also gave me way more confidence. It taught me to accept all the songs that a 18-year-old Stephen Page wrote that I used to maybe be embarrassed about, and also accept and respect the songs that my former bandmates might have written or sung that weren't mine, that I didn't feel the same kind of attachment to. I really just grew to kind of make peace with the whole canon, which has made it a lot easier to move forward. But the last thing is, I feel like I developed this sixth sense, this ability to read the room, even just out of the corner of my eye. And I think it is like being in a live concert where the room is dark, but you can sense in the room, just from the sound and from the electricity, whether a joke is landing, whether they're engaged with the song, and it's the same thing there. And it's like, I'm not actually making eye contact with anybody. That's not a thing. But I've got a sense of who's engaging. When I tell a joke and it doesn't land, I can feel it, because I can tell if people are with me or if they're just waiting for the next thing. When it comes to the length of the show, when I have a mission, like most recent show was like 3 hours because I was doing 2 full albums, which was a little much. But people who were excited to hear all of that stuff were totally fine with that. The other thing is, in that kind of situation, people can do other stuff. They can, whatever. They can do their email. They can wash the dishes. They can take their kids to soccer. And I love that. Like, I love the fact that we've all been able to watch people over the last 6 years now, take their kids to soccer, watch them have babies who are now in 2nd grade and that kind of thing.
So I don't mean to interrupt, but sometimes you'll be playing and you'll look up and like somebody's in their car driving. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. I can see, so I have like, I think it's 49 boxes that I can see at once on my screen. So I kind of can just get a sense from just the way it's something in the movement of that. I can tell if people are in it or not. And so the same instinct I have as a performer, like I do in a let's say in a theater, is like, okay, how do I bang into the next thing that's going to grab their attention quicker? Or do I milk this?
That's very interesting. That you get that sense, but that you don't go back and look at the analytics or at the anything to verify if your instinct was right or not, because you can actually do that now, which you couldn't do in real, in the theater, and because you are such a craftsperson, I'm actually kind of surprised that you don't do it. Let me take you back to Scarborough for 1 minute here, please. And is it okay if we just have a couple more questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I know you didn't want to hear anything about Coffee Time, but I have one thing to tell you. First of all, please. Midland Avenue is very close to where Ed grew up. Okay. But Coffee Time, it's called Coffee Time, or there's Coffee Time and Deli, sometimes they would be. Okay. And they've completely changed their logo and whatever else. And it was definitely a third-rate donut shop. But there was one on Pape Avenue near where I lived off the Danforth for years and years in Toronto that stopped being a Coffee Time and Deli, and somebody else bought it, and when they renamed it, they just changed a few letters, so it became I know what it was. It was called Coffee Time Donuts. That's what it was called, and somebody changed it to Coffee Lime and Deli. So there was a place on Pape Avenue called Coffee, Lime, and Deli, and all they did was just change a few letters of an old Coffee Time Donuts, and I think that's wonderful. One of my favorite things.
I love looking at converted Sizzlers in the States.
Oh, that's a good one.
A similar thing, yeah.
There was a chain of convenience stores called Hasty Market, and I remember there was one that changed to Hearty Market, Harty Market.
Trying to think of so this is super random. I knew one of the 9/11 hijackers because I was living in Salem, Massachusetts, and I went to a 7-Eleven every morning on my way to work and got a pack of cigarettes, a Slim Jim, and a cup of coffee. And for 6 months or something, one of the 9/11 hijackers worked there. And when 9/11 happened, I was like everybody. I was in New York. I was going crazy like everybody, and I kept staring at the TV screen, saying to my ex-wife now, like, I know that guy. I know that guy. I know that guy. And of course, turned out I knew the guy. And all right, okay. So as a result of that, they lost the 7-Eleven franchise. But the giant sign, they didn't want to, so it became Salem 7. And they literally just took spray paint and covered over the word 11 and wrote Salem. That was one of my favorite conversions. This is a Beaver Tails in the Toronto.
That's amazingly dark. Yes. I love it. I'm excited by it.
Yeah.
I don't love it.
Beaver Tails in the Toronto Zoo, which opened when you were a child, I believe.
It did.
And you can tell me about that if you want to or you don't. But what I'd really like to talk about is when you do the Q&A sessions with fans, because that is something that is also very unique to you. Some people might do them like once every couple of years to promote a record, but you're doing them regularly and they're quite long. First, tell me how you prep before you do those sessions. Like, how do you mentally or physically prep before you sit down to do one of those?
For the most part, they're almost always, if I do a live from home on a Saturday night, I will do the Q&A on the following Sunday afternoon. And they're just for my Patreon supporters. And I mean, I had no idea they would go on this long. Like they're an hour long, and it's, 6 years in, people still have questions. And the questions can range from, what do you think about this thing that's going on in the world right now? Or tell me about what I saw this thing about AI. Can you talk about that? So it could be a broader question like that, but it might also be like, who played the guitar on solo on this song? Like, it might be a specific thing about the music. So I'm always interested in what people want to know. I try to do a little preparation in advance, because I think part of the appeal, part of the appeal for people is that they're just kind of catching me in the middle of my day. And especially if I did a live from home the day before, almost all of us shared something the night before. So there's a bit of a sense of like regrouping, which is kind of fun. I thought maybe that might be overkill for people on a weekend, but I think it feels like, in a way, it reminds me of those TV shows that people watch, they watch reality shows and then they watch recap shows. Although we're not necessarily recapping yesterday's show, there is a sense of like, okay, it's a smaller bite of this connection. And I think people root for each other as far as like, we have some people who are regular question askers, and then there are people who've been waiting and kind of working up the nerve. And so I think everybody's kind of rooting for each other, which is kind of fun about it. So I just really try to make it about them.
Right.
And the less I make it about me and how wonderful I am, and really it's just about like, hey, what do you guys want to know? Or what do you want to talk about? Then that's what makes it a success.
At the end of the hour, do you feel exhausted or do you feel elated? Like, do you have to like go put a pillow over your head, or like, does it drain you? I mean, tell me, because there's enough, we all know enough about when a performer plays an arena and the adrenaline and all the difficulties they have coming down from the adrenaline, but there's not a lot of information really. And I know you're a very big advocate about mental health. And so this is really a mental health question more than anything. How do you feel when that Q&A is over, and how do you deal with it?
Interesting, because it's a really interesting question, because, I think after a live from home show, I do feel like it's like doing a concert in public where there is like an adrenaline rush. I couldn't just go right to sleep, Sometimes my wife, Christine, and I will go out for dinner after that, because it does end at 7:00. It's not that late, but it's, that's almost my bedtime when I'm home anyways. But, that's a nice way to celebrate a success of that. Because it does feel like I've really done some work, and there's a bit of I've overcome something. And sometimes it's just like this far into this business of making music, I still have to remind myself, oh, I know how to do this. So at the end of a show, there is like part of you goes, see, I can do it. But the other part of me knows, even if other people are worried that I'm not able to do it, that I'm able to pull that off. But Q&A, it's way less in my control. I don't know what the questions are going to be in advance. And I don't, sometimes I have to be diplomatic in my answers. It might be something that's like too close to the bone, or might unknowingly invade somebody else's privacy in the question. No, people never mean anything bad by anything they ask, but they don't know what my boundaries might be, or imposed boundaries might be. So after a Q&A, sometimes I am exhausted. So if it's summertime, it's nice to go get an ice cream cone afterwards. It's nice that we're done at 2:00, so you still have a day to do something. So sometimes I'm here at the studio, like I'm still editing the show from the night before, or I'm trying to get that show up on the Patreon, or I might have other work I want to do, but usually I'm kind of done then. So then it's time to go and do something, run an errand, live a kind of just a regular home life. Because then you have the rest of the day. The nice thing is I am pretty well able to just leave it here. which is a nice thing. I think otherwise there may have been another time in my life where I'd be dwelling on, did I answer that right? Was I too glib? Was I too in depth? Was I boring? And I still wonder those things in the moment, like even right now as I'm talking to you. But I'm able to kind of let that stuff go, which is, I think, that's a good thing for my mental health.
Good. Serious songwriter question. That I hope is not too personal. And you can just tell me if it is. You know, in almost every interview at some point, it's going to come up about your drug bust and breaking up the band and all that kind of stuff. But the question I have never heard anyone ask you that as a songwriter I am most interested in is, when you were getting clean and when you were getting your life back, you know, together, what records were you listening to? What were your home, like, I know my home records. Like, if my life falls apart, which it has 5, 6, 7 times, you know, I know what records I'm pulling off the shelf immediately. What are yours?
It's amazing. Well, one of the records that really got me through that whole time, well, a few records, but by the Mountain Goats, John Darnielle being, you know, I think one of the great songwriters of all time. And he was actually really helpful to me. When that all happened, when I got arrested, he emailed me and said, be sure to listen to lots of music. You know, he said, for me, it's reggae or whatever. But he said, like, he gave me a couple of songs that had not been released of his. But he said, you know, this is when the music that you love is really going to serve you. And he was absolutely right. And I'm such a huge believer in that kind of thing. And I have kind of a group of individual songs that are amazing to me because they lift me up at the most down points of time, but they also let me sit in my sorrow. You know, I think, you know, it's not like if you were to put on Celebration by Kool and the Gang and you're at your depths, you're just going to be like, turn that off, turn it off. Like you must only be in a celebratory mood when you hear Celebration.
God, it's amazing.
But when you are in a down mood, sometimes there is uplifting music, but it has to have the knowledge of despair. So for me, like a song like, well, it seems like a horrible cliche, but for me, I feel like I'm one of the most magical songs on earth. One of the most magical recordings on earth is Hey Jude.
Okay.
It struck me as a kid and it's just stayed with me, but I think it's not the song. Like, you know, anybody could sing that song and you'd be like, yeah, whatever. Okay, it's Hey Jude. I mean, it's a great song, sure. But it doesn't like fill my soul with something. And it's not when McCartney sings it, and I love McCartney. It's something about that specific moment that they created. And it's like the way that the acoustic guitar and the piano and the ride cymbal mashed together. There's just something in the air of that song that gives me hope. It gives me strength. I think there is lots of other stuff, though, that in that time that, you know, you fall back on your old favorites, but then it was also like just always trying to discover new music. I'm less like that now. I have less bandwidth for new music. It makes me feel like the old boomer that I hated in the early days of BNL, but except for that, I don't tell young people that my stuff was better. It's just mine. It's just what I love.
Can you give me like 5 solid albums that you listened to during that time?
Sure. Well, so let's say
By the Mountain Goats is that the title of the record?
No, the album I probably listened to the most out of that was probably The Sunset Tree. Let's see what else I listened to at that point. Stephen Duffy and the Lilac Time I loved all those records, but the one that really meant a lot to me at that point was one that kind of passed me by when it first came out, called Keep Going. And it, you know, definitely influenced, I used that phrase, keep going, in a later song. There's a Melody, which is definitely inspired by that phrase from him, and not that he invented that, but in that context. I would say Bright Eyes Casadega was a record that we listened to, that Christine and I both listened to a lot at that point, and it reminds me of pulling through that time. It's also interesting because it is kind of a record about getting clean in a way too, or elements of that. What else? A record from my youth that I definitely listened to then and I always go back to is Don't Stand Me Down by Dexys Midnight Runners.
Wow. Okay.
That I think is an absolute masterpiece. And when it came out, it was kind of people thought, oh, the Dexys had lost the plot. This is when they were wearing suits and ties and trying to look like American Ivy Leaguers. And I think it's just a brilliant record. I think Kevin Rowland is one of the great vocalists of all time. And it's so weird because he's not in tune. He's not like he sings 5 notes at once sometimes, but it's, to me, again, it just hits me on the inside in a way that like very little else does.
Okay, you got one more record.
Yeah, well then I'll say I was mentioning Dion before. Dion, Born to Be With You.
Okay.
A big record for me, and that's a really his vocal can lift me anytime.
The reason I laughed so hard at Celebration by Kool and the Gang being the first words out of your mouth.
Yeah.
My old fans know years ago when we just had TikTok, I would go on TikTok live every morning. I'd get about 6,000 people watched me every morning. And it was just a hamburger on my kitchen table in my little apartment with the googly eyes on it. I was off camera and I'd do the same like the Q&A as you do now.
Yep.
And does anybody have any questions, life advice, whatever? And every day somebody would be like, I'm so depressed, I can't get out of bed. What do I do? And the first thing the hamburger would say is, I want you to put on this record. You ready? It's called Celebration, the best of Kool and the Gang. And by the time it gets to ladies' night, you're going to be up and moving. And so I thought that was so funny that you picked that. All right, here's the very last location and the last part of our conversation. And again, I sincerely hope that this is not too personal. And please just tell me if it is. And I sincerely appreciate you answering these questions so earnestly, because it's been so interesting for me to learn about your thought process. This is a Thai Express in the Scarborough town center, which I believe would have opened maybe when you were a teenager. Is that right?
Scarborough Town Center opened, I think, in 1973. It was one of the earlier malls, but it was definitely my home mall. I spent a lot of time there as a teenager, at the Cineplex in the mall, at that food court. I mean, this is a new food court. They put it in a different part of the mall. Barenaked Ladies played at the opening of the Open Window Bakery, at the Scarborough Town Center. We used to play at anything we could do, but like, they got our picture in the Scarborough Mirror. So that's all we cared about. And I think they must have paid us $75 and a loaf of bread each or something like that. But we're like, bread? Free bread? Okay.
So here's the thing.
I have so many memories of this mall.
Yeah, here's the thing I really want to know. I assumed you were going to tell me that, but I wanted to make sure before I got to the real question. So this is your teenage mall, grew up in this mall, everything awesome. I noticed that they have like a walk of fame outside, and that Barenaked Ladies was inducted. Yeah. And I was actually quite heartbroken to see that they named the individual members and did not include you. So, and if this is too personal, please let me know. But I've never been in a situation where there's a plaque outside a mall where I grew up celebrating a band I started, so I don't know what it feels like. And I would like to know what it feels like. Do you ever go back to this mall? Have you seen that plaque? How did you feel about it? Do you just kind of chalk it up to a whole messy point of your life where there's all this shit you hear about later and you're like, well, what can I do? Like, tell me as honestly as you're willing to, how does it feel, and have you revisited it?
I have been at that mall fairly recently, because until very recently, there was an IKEA in that mall. So I went into that IKEA maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago. First time I'd been in that mall in a very long time. And it was fun to walk around the mall. I didn't know that's where the plaque was. I knew about the Walk of Fame thing because I was, I guess, maybe a couple years after they were given that, which of course, yeah, it sucks. I mean, I understand I'm not in the Barenaked Ladies, but that I was there when we signed our record deal in front of Scarborough Civic Center, which is right next door to the mall. It was the city hall. We actually made Seymour Stein from Sire Records come to Scarborough, and we played a live concert in front of whoever wanted to come, a free concert in front of the city hall, and then we sat down at a big table and all signed our record deal right there. So yeah, it sucks that I wasn't included in that. But apparently, I guess they were going to induct me separately a couple of years ago, and then they canceled it. I don't know what happened. I think it's like maybe somebody said, yes, we're going to do it. And then somebody else said, no, we can't. So I don't know if there was like conditional, if they inducted those guys.
There's no more nomination form. I tried to nominate you when I discovered this because I've had this we haven't talked to him in about 5 years, but one of Fred Schneider's big chips on his shoulder in life is that the B-52s never got the Walk of Fame in Hollywood. And so I was like, I'll fill out the paperwork for you. I don't care. And I started to, but there's like a very heavy cost involved. Right. So anyway, I was going to fill out the paperwork for you and then tell you about it now, but they've removed all the nomination forms except for like children who are exceptional children.
Well, I mean, I was once an exceptional child. Yeah. No, that's a shame. But I mean, it's whatever. I don't really, I honestly don't care that much. I don't even care about legacy anymore. I mean, as long as my kids have some money, I want to enjoy, but I do want to enjoy all the stuff now. So if you want to give me an award now, that's fun. I'm not against them, but I don't need people to see it when I'm gone. Who cares?
What was the nostalgic feelings that you had when you walked through the mall?
Oh, well, let me see. They used to have these kind of hot air balloons by the fountain that would rise and lower, the 3 stories of the mall or whatever. And it was like, I could sit there for hours as a young kid. And then there was the arcade. It's very much like it's like, Stranger Things has definitely made kind of a cliche out of my youth. But, you go, and I wasn't a great video game player, but I loved, wasting some quarters on that stuff, and going to eat in the food court was always the greatest. And it was a sizable mall. It wasn't the biggest mall in Toronto, but it felt like, Scarborough was the place that everybody sneered at. They called it Scarberia. So, if we had a mall that was decent enough, and I saw some formative films there, including Losing It, with young, is Tom Cruise in that? I think Tom Cruise is in Losing It. And what else did I see there? I saw a second run of Paul McCartney's rock show, the Wings Over America show there. And I also saw Fame there too. Yeah. So for me, those are kind of the big things, that kind of stuff. But then also, yes, that show playing the Open Window Bakery, spectacular.
Was there a record store in the mall?
Well, yes. As a matter of fact, there was. It was a Music World, and that is where, before I went on this tour of England in 1985, because I would always buy a tape to bring with me on a trip. If we were going somewhere, I'd buy a tape that I knew was going to be like what I was going to listen to on this trip, for my Walkman. And so I spent almost the whole day, because I'm still very indecisive when it comes to that kind of thing. I had to choose one. We'd go to a restaurant, and my dad would say to me, give me 3 choices, because he knew I just couldn't decide what I wanted to order. So he'd say, give me 3 choices and I'll choose for you. And that was a great favor he was doing for me. There's nobody there to do that. So I remember looking at Brian Ferry's Girls and Boys, REM's Fables of the Reconstruction, and Stephen Duffy's The Ups and Downs. And I got the cassette of Stephen Duffy's Ups and Downs. And I often think, what if I'd chosen one of those other records, which records I eventually did get, and I listened to a lot, particularly the REM record. But I was just, all day I'm thinking, well, Can't Get There From Here or Kiss Me. It was between those two. I loved both those songs. And I went for the Stephen Duffy record, and it's probably why I'm sitting here talking to you now.
Changed your life. All right. One super duper duper last question that just remembered when we're talking about it. The lyric, I drove downtown in the rain 9:30 on a Tuesday, I always assumed was coded for you were going to literally or figuratively, you were going to a record store to stay up at midnight when they put out the new releases for the week, which is something that I used to do every week and dump my entire paycheck into. Was that what you were talking about, or was that just
Well, I guess
it was something else?
That would have been a Monday night then, wouldn't it? Because then if
I
was
couldn't
going
remember if it was Tuesdays or Wednesdays when they came out.
Tuesdays was the release day. So I wasn't even that savvy, even though I had worked in a record store at that point. But when I wrote that song, I had spent a few years working in a record store. So Sam the Record Man, downtown Toronto, was this whatever 3-4 story mecca of
I went there. I remember it. Yep.
Yeah, I didn't understand because we are born and raised in Canada to think everything we do is inferior to anywhere else in the world, and I loved especially pre-internet, going around and just buying records wherever I went in the world. And I fell in love with Tower Records in New York City, or the Tower Records in Tokyo, even better, or going to London, whatever else, the great record shops, Virgin Megastore, and so on. But it wasn't until later I realized, oh, Sam's is one of those records stores. It's like one of the great shops. So I certainly knew about the release, but no, it was more like I was just going to get out of my suburban house, where I was still living with my parents, and I would drive downtown just to be surrounded by music and go through the bins, because that's where I felt safe and alive, was surrounded by that stuff. And it wasn't until much later that I realized that song was really about, I knew it was about depression, but I didn't know that that it was mine, I always thought, I don't really have depression. I don't deserve that. I'm not good enough for depression.
Stephen, thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful experience.
Well, it's great.
Everybody watching, I've got all these links in the description. Stephen's Patreon. Check out these concerts he does from home, the Q&As, this upcoming summer camp event, which we didn't really have time to talk about. Craig from Odds is part of most of the bands that Stephen plays in now. Odds is one of my favorite groups of all time as well. Thank you, everybody. I'll see you guys next week. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.